The morning my mother died, my brother called from the hospital parking lot to tell me she was gone, and then asked if I knew where she kept her jewelry box lice. I was standing in my kitchen in scrubs I hadn't changed out of, still damp from a 12-hour shift. I told him. Closet shelf, behind the winter quilts. He said okay and hung up. That was the last time, for a long time, that he spoke to me as though we were on the same side of anything. 18 months later, he filed a complaint with my state nursing board accusing me of diverting pain medication from my dying mother's prescriptions. His wife filed it. She used his name because his name was on the family complaint form, and his name would be believed. I didn't divert anything. I logged everything, every dose, every time, every milligram. But I was the one placed on administrative leave while the investigation ran, so I was the one who looked like she had something to hide. I didn't drive to his house. I didn't call and beg. I let them sit with what they had done while I did something quieter. What they didn't know was that a woman named Wanda had kept 19 years of careful habit on my behalf without knowing she was doing it. 6 weeks later, all three of them stood on my porch, my brother, his wife, my father, and the thing they had spent that time looking for. My compliance, my silence, my old reflex to absorb the damage and keep the peace, was the one thing I had finally stopped carrying. The signed receipt at an antique dealer 7 blocks from my sister-in-law's office is where this really begins. So let me tell you about the ring it was quietly deciding the future of. My mother's name was Patricia. She taught 3rd grade at Millbrook Elementary in Dayton, Ohio for 28 years. She remembered everything, her students' nicknames, their siblings' names, what they were afraid of, who needed a gentler voice on a hard day. The year she got her diagnosis, she still showed up. She stood at her whiteboard until chemotherapy made standing impossible, and even then she sent cards to her class from the hospital. She was the kind of person who understood that small gestures are not small to the people who receive them. She died in March on a Tuesday. She was 61. What she left behind, besides the shape of her and the particular quiet of a house that adjusts to a person's absence, was one physical thing she had asked me to keep. Her mother's engagement ring, an oval sapphire set in plain yellow gold, nothing that would stop anyone in a jewelry store. The kind of ring you inherit because of what it has witnessed, not what it weighs. She told me about it in February, 2 months before she died. I was sitting on the edge of her hospital bed, changing the dressing on her PCCI line. And she waited until I had nearly finished and then said it directly, the way she said the things she meant. The ring goes to you. I told Clara to keep the letter. Clara is my aunt, my mother's younger sister, a retired school librarian. The person in our family who writes things down on purpose and does not misplace them. My mother trusted her the way you trust someone whose whole life has been built around the preservation of what matters. I told her I understood. She watched me for a moment, deciding whether I actually did or was just agreeing to make the moment easier. Then she settled back and closed her eyes, and I gathered my tassais papaizas, and I told myself I was memorizing the room, and I pretended not to understand what I was memorizing it for. 2 months later, she was gone, and my brother called from a parking lot, and I told him about the quilts. My brother is 4 years older than me. He sells commercial real estate, and he is good at it, for the same reason he is difficult to argue with. He has a patient, confident face and a talent for long silences that most people read as depth rather than avoidance. He married his wife 6 years ago. She works in marketing. She is smart in the specific way that makes certain people genuinely dangerous, which is that her intelligence runs toward people, what they want, what they're afraid of, what they'll surrender to avoid a certain kind of scene. She had spent 5 years learning exactly what my brother would give up to keep their household calm. The answer, it turned out, was nearly anything. I am an emergency room nurse. I was 31 when my mother died. I had managed her medications for the last 11 months of her illness, not because anyone officially asked me to, but because I knew what I was doing, and I was there, and no one else wanted to learn which pill was which. My sister-in-law attended 2 home health visits and then decided the drives were too far. My brother came on weekends when his schedule allowed. My father did what he could, which varied by the week. I drove 40 minutes each way after every shift that ended before 9, and I told myself that was simply what you did when someone needed you, and you were the one who could do it. I have thought since about how much weight a family can place on that reasoning, how many years you can continue under that understanding without anyone once asking what the continuing costs you. My mother had a home health aide for the final 5 months. Her name was Wanda. She was 53 and had worked for the same home care agency for 19 years, and she was the most methodical person I have ever encountered in a clinical context, and I have encountered many methodical people. Every visit, she logged it. Medication names, doses, times, the patient's condition, any changes from the care plan. By hand, in a spiral-bound notebook she brought with her and took home each evening. She also entered everything into the agency's electronic system from her kitchen table at night. Her agency required the digital record. The notebook was her own system, separate, kept, because she had been doing this long enough to know that paper survives arguments. I did not think much about Wanda's notebook while my mother was alive. It was just part of the landscape of those months. I understand now that it was the most important object in that house. After my mother died, grief settled into the shape of ordinary days, because that is the only form it can take when you have rent and a job and a schedule that doesn't care how you feel. I went back to my shifts. My brother handled the estate, or said he was handling it. My father moved slowly and spoke less than before. My sister-in-law began appearing at family dinners with a new frequency and a particular attentiveness toward the furniture, the photographs, the things my mother had owned. I noticed it, the way you notice pressure building before you can name what it's building toward. She asked about the ring at a Sunday dinner 6 weeks after the funeral. Casually, warmly, just wondering aloud what everyone was thinking about your mother's belongings, not wanting anything to get lost in the shuffle. I told her about Clara's letter, that the ring had a designated recipient, and that recipient was me. She nodded in the smooth way. She nodded at things she had already decided to handle differently, and changed the subject, and I thought that was the end of it. I understand now that the nodding was the beginning, not the end. The letter from my hospital came on a Thursday morning in September, 14 months after my mother's death. Administrative leave, effective immediately, pending investigation into allegations of medication diversion during a home care period. I read it in my kitchen, and the room did something strange, not spinning, but flattening, the way a space does when something happens in it that divides your life into before and after. The meeting with HR gave me the shape of it. A family member had reported concerns to the state licensing board directly, not to the hospital, to the board, which meant it had been filed by someone who knew exactly which office would trigger the most serious consequence for someone in my profession. A board complaint against a nurse is not a disagreement. It is a suspension of livelihood while the truth waits in a queue. My license was in a pending status. I could not work. I sat in my car in the hospital parking structure, and I knew, with a certainty that required no deliberation, who had filed it. Not my brother. My brother would have called me. He would have made it uncomfortable and emotional and direct, the way family confrontations are. This had been precise. The right office, the right language, the right timing. That was not my brother's work. It was hers. My father called that evening. He was gentle, which was harder than anger would have been, because gentle meant he had already decided something and was calling only to manage the transition. He said, "There are some concerns, and I'm sure it's a misunderstanding, and just try not to worry too much." He did not ask me what had happened. He did not ask whether I was all right. At one point, he covered the mouthpiece and spoke with someone in the background, and when he came back, he said he had to go. He never asked me one single question. I have thought about the not asking more than I have thought about almost anything else in this whole story. He had watched me drive 40 minutes after night shifts for 11 months. He had watched me sort prescriptions and talk to pharmacists and sit up on my days off reading her care plan adjustments. He heard one thing from one source and closed without checking, not because he was fooled. Because opening would have required a difficult conversation he had no interest in having. I called Clara that night. She picked up on the second ring. When I had finished telling her everything, she was quiet for a moment in the way she gets quiet when she is thinking more quickly than she is showing. Then she said, "I know, and I need to tell you something. The ring is gone." She had tried to retrieve the letter from her fireproof box and discovered the ring was no longer in its place. She made calls through the estate attorney, a detail my brother had never thought to mention to me. Clara discovered that my sister-in-law had been in communication with him for months. My mother's letter was handwritten, not formally incorporated into a legal document. The estate had not been probated. The ring existed in a gap. Clearly intended for me, undisputed in meaning, but without the legal weight that comes from a properly executed codicil. Into that gap, my sister-in-law had moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been measuring it for a long time. She had sold the ring to an antique dealer 7 blocks from her office. Clara had found the receipt. It had fallen from a coat pocket at a family dinner the month before, and Clara had picked it up, recognized the dealer's name from a consignment she'd made years earlier, and photographed it before setting it on the counter. She said nothing to anyone. She had simply kept the photograph and waited to understand what it meant. Now she understood. The sale had been made 4 weeks after the complaint against my license was filed. She had waited long enough for the leave to be in place, long enough for my credibility to be in question, long enough for me to appear to the family like exactly the kind of person who might also have taken a ring. She removed the most likely objector before she moved. She did not leave room for me to object, because the plan relied on my being too discredited to be heard. I sat at Clara's table and said, "What do we have?" The way you say it when the alternative to accounting is falling apart on someone else's floor. Clara said, "More than they think they left us." She engaged the estate attorney in her capacity as named executor. Again, something no one had apparently checked before making their calculations. The signed receipt gave him clear grounds, a ring sold before probate closed, by someone with no legal standing to sell it, from an estate still in process. He contacted the dealer. The man cooperated fully. He had bought the ring in good faith and wanted nothing to do with a fraud claim. The records were clean and clear and damning. Then Clara called Wanda. It was the logical step for a person who thinks in primary sources. The question was, who was actually present? Wanda was present, every week for 5 months. Clara reached her through the agency and explained the situation. Wanda still had her notebooks. Her agency's policy requires retention of physical care logs for 2 years. She had kept hers considerably longer than policy required because 19 years of work had taught her that the notebook was not paperwork. It was testimony. She had the electronic records too, time-stamped in the agency's system from the night of each visit, unalterable, cross-referenced with pharmacy dispensing logs. When Clara told her what had been alleged about me, Wanda was quiet for a moment. Then she said simply and clearly, "That is not what those records show, not even close." The state board had already requested documentation. The agency submitted the electronic records within 48 hours. Wanda submitted her handwritten notebook as supplemental material with a cover letter. She wrote herself stating that the records were contemporaneous and could be verified against pharmacy data if the board wished. My attorney, a woman I had hired the day after the leave letter arrived because I understood immediately that what had been filed was not a misunderstanding but a tactic, submitted both. Every milligram was accounted for. Every dose my mother received was logged before and after by two people using two systems, neither of which left a single gap. There was no diversion. There was only a complete, unbroken record of a daughter who showed up and did not make mistakes. My sister-in-law made her second error 10 days before the board concluded its review. She called Wanda directly. I don't know the exact words of the conversation. "Dad," Wanda told me afterward, without any particular emotion, that the woman had asked her to clarify certain entries, and that the clarification she seemed to be seeking was one that would support the complaint rather than contradict it. Wanda told her that her records said what they said, that she stood behind them entirely, and that she was available to any attorney or pair board representative who wanted to review the notebooks in person. She ended the call. Then she wrote a note in her personal file, the date, the time, the nature of the inquiry, and what she had said in response. Wanda is 53 years old, and she has been doing this work since before I had a nursing license. She told me once, when I asked why she kept the paper record in addition to the digital one, that she did it. Because the book didn't need a login, and it didn't go down, and nobody could edit an entry made in ink on a dated page without it being immediately visible. I keep the book, she said, so the truth has somewhere to live. The board cleared my license 7 weeks after the complaint was filed. The letter used the word unfounded and restored my status without conditions. My hospital reinstated me that Monday. My charge nurse looked up from the assignment board when I walked in and said, "Good, I need you in Bay 3. And that was the entire welcome back, and it was exactly right. The ring came back by certified mail in a padded envelope 6 weeks after the complaint was dismissed. Clara called me when it arrived. I drove to her house and held it for a long time before I put it back in the fireproof box. My brother called the Thursday before they came to my door. His voice was careful in the way it gets careful when he's approaching something he doesn't know how to carry anymore. He said he had spoken with Wanda. He had reviewed the records. He wanted to say certain things in person. He did not apologize on the phone. I noticed that. A phone apology costs nothing. He was saving it for the porch, where it could be delivered with body language and eye contact and all the tools that make an apology feel like an offering rather than a transaction. I told him I'd be home Sunday afternoon. They came at 2 o'clock. I watched them come up the walk from my kitchen. My brother rang the bell. I let it ring twice. Some silences need a moment to settle before you interrupt them. My sister-in-law spoke first, as she always did, as she had spent 6 years training herself to do. She said my name in the careful, softened way of someone presenting themselves as a person of feeling. She said misunderstanding and hard season and family in quick succession. She said no one had wanted it to go as far as it went. On her wrist as she spoke was a thin gold chain with a small pearl drop I recognized. It had been my mother's. It had not appeared in any estate record I had seen. She either didn't know I would recognize it, or she had stopped calculating whether I would. I wasn't sure which of those was more instructive. My father spoke next. He was looking at a point past my shoulder, at the wall, or the middle distance. We spoke to the aide, he said. We saw what the records showed. He stopped. His throat worked. I should have asked you first, before any of this started. I should have just asked you what happened. He had finally arrived at the right question. It was 6 weeks and 1 recovered ring too late. My sister-in-law was still speaking, Something about not letting one chapter define a relationship, about moving through difficulty together, about the word family one more time. I looked at her, then at my brother, then at my father. No, I said. She stopped. My brother looked up, my father went still. No, I said again. Not louder, just clearer. You filed a complaint designed to suspend my license time to when you needed me discredited. You sold my mother's ring 4 weeks later, while I was on leave and everyone was already willing to believe the worst of me. You waited until my credibility was gone before you moved, because the plan required me to be too discredited to be heard. I looked at my brother. You knew Wanda existed. You knew she had been in that house every week for 5 months. You could have called her the day you heard the complaint. You chose not to, because calling her would have required a conversation with your wife you didn't want to have. Lauren, my brother started. The license came back, I said evenly, because I had been quiet for 6 weeks and I was not going to rush now that it was my turn. The ring came back. The board closed with no findings. Everything that was taken is back where my mother put it, and none of that happened because of anything any of you did. It happened because a woman kept a spiral notebook for 19 years, and my aunt kept a receipt that fell from a coat pocket. You're here today because the story stopped holding, and you need something from me to close it. That's not reconciliation. That's the same arrangement trying to open again under a different name. My father looked at me for the first time, fully, and I could see in his face that he knew I was right, and that knowing it was costing him something, and some part of me registered that as real, but sorry that only arrives after proof presents itself, is a different kind of sorry than the trust that doesn't wait for proof. He had heard one voice from one direction and closed. He had known if he was honest, and he was honest now that it was too late for the honesty to be useful, he had known something wasn't right, and he had chosen the version that cost him the least to believe. I'm going to close the door, I said. I kept my voice level. Not cold, level, there is a difference. Cold is a performance. Level is what happens when you've said exactly the true amount and have nothing left to add. I rested my hand on the frame. I let them stand there for one more breath, all 3 of them on my porch in the afternoon light, so that everyone present could feel the full weight of the quiet. Then I closed the door. Not hard, just closed it, the way you close a door, when what's on the other side of it is no longer yours to manage. Consequences don't come all at once. They arrive in their own order, and there is something clarifying in watching each one reach the right address. My sister-in-law was let go from her firm several weeks later. When your name appears on a probate-adjacent fraud transaction that finds its way into an estate attorney's records, certain professional environments grow quietly inhospitable. Nothing was put in writing about the reason. Nothing had to be. My father left a voicemail. It was long, and his voice broke in it more than once. He said he should have asked. He said he had known that somewhere in him he had known what Wanda's records would show, and he had decided not to ask because not asking was easier, and that easy had cost him something he hadn't properly counted the value of before he spent it. He said that out loud, which was more honesty than I had expected from him. I'm not sure it changes much. But I heard it. I listened to the whole message all the way to the end. I saved it in a folder on my phone, the way you keep a receipt for something you paid more for than it was worth, because you may need to understand the total of it again someday, from a different distance. I did not call back. Not yet. The not yet doesn't feel like punishment. It feels like the first time I've held a position in my family without someone talking me out of it before it finished forming. My Aunt Clara asked me once, after everything settled, whether I regretted closing the door when I did, instead of saying more. I thought about it honestly. Then I said no. I had said exactly what was true, in exactly the words it needed, without one extra syllable spent on performance. For most of my adult life, I had done one of two things: swallowed things to keep everyone comfortable, or finally said too much after I'd held too long and the pressure made it ugly. This time, neither. I said the true amount and stopped. That felt like something worth keeping. The ring is in the fireproof box at Clara's house, on top of my mother's letter. The estate attorney formally entered the letter into the probate record, so it cannot be contested again. It says what it has always said. In my mother's handwriting, in the shorthand she used for things she meant without needing ceremony. The ring goes to Lauren. She'll know when it's time. I'm 31. I don't know yet when it's time. I work Tuesdays, Thursdays, and every other weekend. Wanda and I have coffee sometimes. She's working a new case now, a retired art teacher who needs help in the mornings. She still keeps the notebook. She will keep it for as long as she works and possibly after. My mother used to say that the truth was never the problem. The problem was always people deciding the cost of knowing it was more than they could afford. She said it about her students. The ones who made one dishonest choice and then couldn't stop, because stopping meant acknowledging they'd started. I thought for a long time she was talking about 9-year-olds. I understand now she was talking about everyone, including the adults who were supposed to know better and sometimes did know better and chose the easier direction anyway. I kept showing up for my family because I believed that was what love looked like when it was actual and not theoretical. For a long time, it was. What I know now is that love in practice has a floor. Below the floor is a different arrangement. One that draws from one person so that everyone else can remain undisturbed. And the way you know you have been living below the floor is that when you finally stop, the people who relied on the arrangement come to your door and call it a hard season. The bracelet is still being handled. My attorney sent a letter. These things take the time they take, and the ones worth recovering usually require patience. The ordinary things came back first. They always do. I learned the name of the patient in the bed closest to the nurse's station who wanted to know who was on shift. I started sleeping through the night, and then didn't, and then did again. I stopped flinching when my phone lit up on the table. I still sometimes reach for my phone to tell my brother something small. A story from the ER, something I noticed on the drive home, and I let my hand stop before it gets there. Not forever, maybe. But for now, and now is the only part I'm responsible for. My mother was right about the things worth keeping. They are almost never the ones that look expensive. They are the ones that were made carefully, by someone paying attention, with the understanding that careful things last longer than anyone expects and matter more than anyone counted on. The ring is in the box. The letter is in the file. Wanda's notebook is in her storage closet, with 19 years of other true things written in ink on dated pages by someone who understood that truth needs somewhere to live if it's going to outlast the people who want it quiet. I have that now. I have a place where the true things live. That is not a small inheritance. It is in the end exactly what my mother was trying to give me. Not the sapphire, not the gold, not the four walls of any house. Just this, the knowledge that what you document carefully, what you carry honestly, what you refuse to hand over when someone demands it, that is the thing no one can sell while you're not looking. I am not looking away anymore.